America got its debate, apparently the only one before the votes are cast November 5th. Did it shift the very tight margins? And the last couple of decades have seen the defining moments for Detroit's future. We'll talk with John Gallagher about his new book, chronicling them all. Today is Sunday, September 15th, 2024, and this is Flashpoint. Hi, welcome to Flashpoint, and it would seem we had a bit of a flashpoint this past week. In general, I'm not sure debates usually do all that much to sway opinion, but that's not to say they can't have an impact. In fact, the first presidential debate this year was the catalyst that ensured Joe Biden would be a one-term president, and Democrats turned their hopes to Vice President Harris. Well, what about this debate? Donald Trump still insists he won, but while he and some others wanted to blame the moderators for tilting the stage, the general consensus was that Kamala Harris came away the winner. In fact, even Lindsey Graham said right after the debate it was a disaster for Donald Trump. The evening, I'm afraid, will mostly be remembered for Trump's mad insistence that immigrants in Ohio were eating people's pets. I'm not sure that's how the president's support team drew it up. It would appear this is the only debate between the two we're going to get. So what is the upshot in a race that seems destined to come down to just a few votes in just a few states? Did anything happen Tuesday night that makes the difference? We're going to talk about that this morning with a close eye on the Michigan vote, of course. We're also going to talk about the end of the investigation into Larry Nassar and Michigan State University. Last week, Attorney General Dana Nessel described the huge haul of MSU documents as embarrassing but not incriminating, despite the fact that former MSU President Lou Anna Simon regularly deleted text messages, and the university's flimsy defense of attorney-client privilege was largely nonsensical. 7 years of investigating comes to, well, really nothing. And we're going to talk this morning with former Free Press columnist John Gallagher about his new book, Rust Belt Reporter, From Kwame Kilpatrick to the Grand Bargain and a City's Renaissance, all today on Flashpoint. All right, quite a week in politics, of course, so let's talk about it with this morning's roundtable. With me today, the editorial page editor of the Detroit Free Press, Nancy Kaffer, CEO of Focus Hope, Portia Roberson is here. From Densar Consulting, Dennis Darnoy back with us again, and so is the executive director of Michigan Rising Action, Abby Mitch. Dennis, I want to start with you. You have watched a lot of debates over the years. I think you agree with my characterization that they seldom are the difference maker. Yep. But plus, especially in these razor-thin margin states like Michigan, was there anything that you saw that really moved the needle Tuesday night?
Not really. I mean, there were three things that we were looking for. Was Donald Trump able to stay disciplined and stay on message? That was a resounding no. Was the vice president able to demonstrate that she belonged on that stage? That was a resounding yes. Was the vice president able to speak to middle-of-the-road voters and provide some substance to the things that she had put out there? The answer is no. And what we've seen in polling afterwards is independent voters who went in looking for a bit of substance remain unchanged. They're not for Trump. They're not for her. They're just sitting in the middle of the road going, will someone please tell me something that has a little specifics behind it?
Nancy, what did you see Tuesday night?
Well, I think to say that the former president did not stay on message is kind of an understatement. And while it's easy to laugh about him recirculating debunked untrue things about immigrants eating cats and dogs, it's easy to laugh, and it's harder to see the harm that causes to communities. The animal shelter in that county in Ohio has been overwhelmed by people calling because they believe that cats and dogs are being eaten. There's hatred espoused toward members of the immigrant community, and that is kind of part and parcel with the rhetoric he deployed in his first campaign, his presidency, and I think it's here's more of the same.
But I guess the question is, did he lose anybody?
No, no. But it's just, but we see what we're getting here. I think the vice president, on the other hand, she was presidential, and, I don't know how anyone can look at those two and go, no, this guy who talks about Haitians eating cats is my guy, but about half of America feels that way.
Abby, did it go the way you expected it to, or were you particularly shocked by it? Because we all know Donald Trump is not a particularly disciplined debater.
I mean, from the perspective of did Harris present herself as presidential, I'm going to respectfully disagree with that one. I think she got away with not embarrassing herself. I don't think she did any of the things she needed to do, as Dennis pointed out, to pull new voters to her side. And I think the fact that she wasn't really pressed for follow-up on anything. I mean, at one point she got away with saying small business is my passion with no question, and that was a response to a question on immigration. I don't think she did come off as presidential, someone who can take the tough fights, someone who can walk into a hostile room and come out on top.
She did look more like the grown-up, though, didn't she? I mean, she goaded. It was clear that the crowd size thing, I know, was a trigger point that they had decided, you know, if you start making fun of his crowds and his rallies, and it certainly worked. I mean, he took the bait on that.
So I would say to say that Kamala Harris came out on top is like saying she was the tallest sixth grader. Okay, good for you.
Okay. What about you, Portia?
I mean, I don't think the needle moved for most independent voters.
Well, okay, that's kind of the.
But I don't think debates have done that in a long time. I don't think people come into debates really changing their mind unless something really outrageous happens, which in this case you would think that some people would call what he did and how he acted outrageous. I think for me the concern is, you know, you talk about Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, goading him into something. The reality of it is what happens if a world leader goads him into something? Because we see that he cannot respond in a way that is careful and thought out, and that he's not disciplined enough to stick to what he's supposed to do. And that is what scares me more so than anything else, right? I would love for both of them to have had even more policy discussions, but you can't have policy discussions with a man who is talking about Haitians eating cats and dogs.
Well, to both Dennis and Abby's points, though, I think a lot of people felt that what Kamala Harris needed to do was really be able to describe what she wants to do. Her plan, which a lot of people feel hasn't been particularly well drawn out or enumerated, and yet we're all talking about dogs and cats. Did she miss an opportunity to really make her case?
No, I think she continued to make her case throughout the debate as much as she possibly can. But even when you saw him in a debate with Joe Biden, right, the problem, I think, amongst other things, is that President Biden could not respond to somebody who is so tragically ill-prepared to be the leader of the free world, who is so out of control at every moment. And I think the same thing happens with Vice President Harris, is that she's trying to debate him, she's trying to talk about topics on policy. He won't even talk about that. He's just screaming things out because he wants to make a point that he is the biggest, the baddest, the person that everyone is the most afraid of.
Dennis, we're not apparently going to have another debate. Do you want one?
Oh, absolutely.
I kind of do.
Yeah, I absolutely do. I thought it was clever on the vice president's part to throw it out immediately after the debate, put him under the pressure of saying no or accepting it. Personally, if I was part of his campaign team, I would have said, yes, let's do it in Arizona, and let's have Fox run the run the debate, be the moderators. But the truth of the matter is, look, when it comes down to the number one issue for independent voters, it's the economy. And people say, whatever. He was president for 4 years. They can see him as president. They know what he will do as president. And they like their 401k under him as president. So I do think she missed an opportunity to say, this is what my economic plan is. Not just broad little, I'll help this or I'll help that. So again, it was a missed opportunity for her.
Abby, do you want another debate? Or given what you said about the middle voters not moving anywhere, is there any point in
Is that going to be the outlier? I mean, other than being someone who's paid to watch this blood sport, I can't see the value of a debate. I think that if you look at Trump's strategy of mostly doing streaming, he knows where his audience is and what they're watching. It's not network debates.
Yeah, fair. I want to make sure we talked also today about the decision from Attorney General Dana Nessel this past week. She said, embarrassing, all those documents from MSU about Larry Nassar, absolutely. Incriminating, not so much. Nancy, what's your take on that after 7 years, this is where we end up?
You know, the way MSU has responded to this whole thing has been baffling to me. A horrible, horrible thing happened.
Yeah.
It went undetected or unexposed for so long. The right thing to do is to acknowledge promptly, figure out what you can do as much as you can make it right, to make amends, not make it right. You can never make it right. But also, why is there still an argument about transparency? The Attorney General talked about they inappropriately used attorney-client privilege. If you're MSU and you released all these documents 7 years ago, this isn't a news story now. So it would have been the smart thing to do, but also the right thing to do, because something horrible happened there. And when something horrible happens, there's a more pressing concern than your legal liability or how you're going to spin it. And I'm still baffled by that strategy and how it's been playing out for almost a decade.
Let's ask the attorney at the table. Portia, what are your thoughts?
I have a friend who says it's never the lie, it's always the cover-up, right? And that is exactly what happened in this instance. And I think Michigan State, I know they have a new president. I think they're going to do all they can to sort of turn the page. But this is going to be a stain on them for a very, very long time. And I thought, Daniel House wrote an article last week that talked about sort of this closing of the ranks around some of by the trustees, by the president at the time, by the second president that they had. And I think that is really also very telling about, to be candid, Rima Vassar is a friend of mine, and I saw the pressure on her to try to get rid of her because she was one who was saying, let's put it all out there and let people see what has happened up here. And I think the victims of this crime deserved that.
Yeah, Abby, that's what I was thinking about. All of these young women, and it is so many, and yet one more time they're told, nah, we don't quite have enough here for you.
Yeah, I think we finally found the issue where the left meets the right. I mean, I agree with what the PR was baffling and to the extent of, in some cases, being cruel to sort of drag this out. But I think we also have to go, there was a tactful, subtle way for the Attorney General to go about this, and she has made as much public hay as she can every step of the way. And I think that also deserves a level of accountability.
In fact, Dennis, I've been wondering a little bit about what this is for. I mean, obviously, a lot of this is about MSU and the way they handled it. But what is it about Dana Nessel? Because not only is this now come after 7 years to really, there's nothing that we can move forward with. That's kind of what happened in Flint. Nobody being held responsible.
Yeah, I mean, and that was what I was going to say is you have two major issues that happened in the state, and yet there isn't anyone really being held accountable. And the victims, both in Flint and at MSU, time and time again are being let down by the people they thought would go out there and help them. So I do think that there is a bit of a credibility attack on the AG's office, and honestly, it's a little bit well-deserved in both those cases.
So it's important to remember that those prosecutions, started under the former Republican AG, but part of the problem, like in Flint—
You're talking about Flint.
Yes, right, is that our laws aren't constructed to hold people in those offices accountable when something like this happens. We were told again and again that if elected officials in Michigan were prosecuted over the Flint water crisis, that it would be a huge disincentive, that no one would ever run for office again. There was an effort to prosecute them, really mixed results, with some convictions, some not, but we need laws. I do think there are things that happen in the course of being an elected official that you can't foresee. There are some things that you have to see what's happening in front of you, and it's simply, but our legal code is not really constructed to provide accountability, criminal accountability in most of these cases.
Last word on Dana Nessel. Portia.
Yeah, I think, there's a level of disappointment from what happened not only in Flint, but what has happened in Michigan State. And I think, Nancy hit the nail on the head. I think that there is not an appetite for going after people who have done less than what they should. And of course, you're going to ask for that from your Attorney General, to do all that you can to prosecute everybody that was involved. I think, certainly in Flint, there was an effort to do that. I don't know that there was not as much effort in the instance of MSU, and I think that that's going to come back to haunt her and also her office.
Friends, we've got to leave it there. Thank you all so much for being here. We come back, I'll be joined by former Detroit Free Press columnist John Gallagher. This is Flashpoint on Local 4. Longtime viewers of this program have heard quite a few conversations over the years with former Detroit Free Press columnist John Gallagher. He is out with a new book that chronicles some of the very pivotal moments for Detroit over the last couple of decades. The book is Rust Belt Reporter, and it is great to have John Gallagher back with me on Flashpoint. John, thanks for being here, and congratulations on the book.
Thanks so much.
I want, as we zoom out and look at I came to Detroit 29 years ago, and that is a lot of the time that you really, to look back and think about all of the things that occurred in those 3 decades, and to see where we are today versus where we are there. I know that even you're astonished at where we are.
Exactly. I spent the first 15, 20 years here, chronicling the decline, which was relentless and unending, and Detroit was viewed at the end of the line, the end of history, sort of a national joke, Rust Belt, capital of the world. And then very slowly, thanks to a lot of people, began to turn around. No silver bullets, just a mosaic of efforts by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people across many fields, slowly inching the city forward. And at some point, 10, 15 years ago, it really began to take hold.
I expected we all expected a renaissance to happen so many times, and it didn't. I don't think we all understood how important it was for the city to get through a bankruptcy first.
Right.
Maybe that was, if there was a silver bullet, that was the ingredient that had to happen.
Yeah, because I think the city was really more of an obstacle for so many years. It was broke, it was dysfunctional, understaffed and underfunded. And when we finally straightened out the city through the bankruptcy, that allowed the city to become a more positive player, and that helped enormously.
One of my favorite, and I can't believe as long as I've known you, that I did not know until looking over some of the book, that you were the guy who actually coined the term grand bargain when you were talking to Judge Jerry Rosen.
Right, it was during the bankruptcy, and it was one of these conversations where he's describing this effort to have the foundations put in a lot of money and save the pension, save the artwork. And I said, oh, sounds like a grand bargain. And we wrote that the next day, and it got picked up. So it was accidental, but right,
yeah,
that's how it happened.
That grand bargain, though, that was such a key thing that happened. I've often referred to Detroit as the city that was saved by its art. It's funny because that also makes it, that gives short shrift, because there were some, though it was not pain-free for a lot of Detroiters, and some of them did have to, but it could have been, I guess, much, much worse at the end, right? Yeah,
and I think the grand bargain really captures how so many people wanted to help Detroit. I mean, I think Detroit's reputation as sort of the worst city in the world actually had a benefit, because everyone wanted to save Detroit because of its rich history, the auto industry, Motown music, the American labor movement born here.
Yeah.
And so you had the foundations, you had the billionaires, you had a legislature in Lansing that was mixed, Democrat and Republican. Everybody pitched in. The governor, a Republican governor.
Right.
The Obama administration, everybody pitched in, and I think everybody came together in what had to be a landmark time for the city.
That really is the story of it, this ecumenicalism that we don't see in anything in American life these days somehow managed to. You talk quite a bit about a larger-than-life character, of course, in Detroit, and Kwame Kilpatrick. I think you and I both share the sense that he had such gifts and could have been such a commanding well, he was a commanding presence, but could have been a much more benevolent commanding presence than what it ended up happening. It's an American tragedy in a way.
It's very, very disappointing. As I say in there, when he first came on the scene, it was just one of the perks of my job that I got to interview him and listen to him make a speech. He was brilliant.
Yes.
And it's only gradually that we became aware of how much was sort of behind the curtain. So I think a tragedy and a major disappointment.
Yeah. Let's talk about Detroit today and what you see as you look around, and the biggest. Let's start with the RenCen. What are we going to do with the RenCen, given that its biggest occupant, its biggest tenant, is moving out?
Well, I think that what I'm hearing is that there's a serious consideration given to demolishing at least 2 of the towers, or converting the rest to residential. But for me, we've torn down the Kmart headquarters. Now we're tearing down parts of the RenCen. Ford built an office building in Dearborn called Regent Court 25 years ago. That's gone now. I mean, the fact
Hudson's building.
Hudson's building. I mean, the fact that we're tearing down major landmarks, in some cases, when the people who built them are still living, says something about the throwaway culture and how we just don't make stuff last like they do in
I don't
cities.
quite know what to think about the Renaissance Center, because most of us who've ever been in it hate it as a building. It's so confusing, it's confounding, and yet I like it as architecture, as statuary, I guess, right? It's such an iconic piece of our skyline.
Yeah, and it's hard to imagine having become this iconic piece of the skyline that now it may come down. It's just mind-boggling.
Yeah, it is.
So we'll see what they come up with.
You've also written a lot, even since you retired, about I-375 and trying to solve this conundrum of what to do there. Tell me where you expect that to head, because we haven't been able to find much agreement on it.
Right. Well, it seems to be stalled at the moment. MDOT got such pushback from their plan, rightly so. I think it was a pretty bad plan, that now they've gone back to the drawing board. So we'll see. But I think it's great that we think about removing expressways, which did enormous damage to American cities. But how you do that is just as important as doing it at all. And there's so many disagreements about we want this or that or the other thing. that I think we're going to be debating that for a while before they actually do anything.
Stunning that we've arrived, though, at a place where Money Magazine has named Detroit as one of the best places to live. I
Right.
don't imagine you thought that was coming in say, 1995.
No, and some of the big wins we've had recently, like the NFL draft,
Yes.
even though it's symbolic, it's just astonishing to see those images.
Yeah, really great. The book is Rust Belt Reporter by John Gallagher. There is actually a couple of excerpts from the book in today's edition of the Detroit Free Press in the opinion section. John, it's great to have you back on the program.
Thank you
Thanks
so
so
much.
much. And
Thank you so much.
congratulations again. Wrap things up for Flashpoint right after this. Before we go, I want to quickly mention, you may know my father, Colonel Bill Skillion, passed away last weekend, and I have just been overwhelmed by the messages of kindness and support and love from people like you. You've made an awful situation more bearable, and I'm grateful. That's it for this week. Meet the Press coming up next. We'll see you next time for Flashpoint.